Before the voice comes, there is only the hum of a nation in ruins. Radios sit on tatami floors and countertops, in station offices and factory break rooms, in barracks and in the shadowed corners of shrines. The dials glow, needles trembling, as if the machines themselves are anxious. The morning light of August 15th, 1945, spills over broken neighborhoods and blackened beams, over rice paddies and air raid trenches, and the ruins of stations where trains still arrive on time. In the Imperial Palace, a complex of quiet courtyards and burn-scarred roofs inside, Tokyo's encircling catastrophe, men move quietly through rooms that smell of lacquer and smoke. They are guarding something small and circular and dangerously fragile. The discs are pale, lacquered, and heavy in the hand. On them, carved in grooves the width of a hair, is a voice no subject has ever heard, the Emperor's. On the night before, deep beneath the palace in a reinforced chamber built to survive the worst, technicians from the national broadcaster have threaded a sensitive microphone, checked levels by whispering into their palms, and watched as His Majesty stood before a script written in courtly Japanese, older than the radios themselves. He read as if addressing not only the living, but the uncounted dead. Even now, listening in their homes and workplaces, many will struggle to recognize the words. But they will understand the meaning. Upstairs, the palace is no longer entirely safe. Hours earlier, in darkness and rain, a group of officers, young, indignant, convinced that surrender is worse than ruin, pushed their way past gate guards and seized key rooms by the light of flashlights and the confidence of certainty. They are searching for the voice. They believe that if they can silence it, order can be restored. They carry forged orders and real rifles. They have already done irrevocable things to men who stood in their way. They know the discs exist, and they know they could fit in the crook of an arm. A court lady kneels on a polished floor where the grain of the wood holds a reflection. She is not a soldier, not a politician, not even mentioned in any report. She has been asked to help hide something, and she has done it tucking it away behind a locked door, masking it behind piles of documents and a tapestry, then retreating into the machinery of a palace where servants are as invisible as they are necessary. In the corridors, the rebels' boots make a sound that does not belong in the place. They open cabinets, flip through folders. One leans close to a radio, as if to hear premature words rising from somewhere else in the building. The clock on the wall ticks toward noon. Outside, the city listens. Workers stand next to loom frames with their hands at their sides. Children are still for once. Trains stop and wait under signals that have not changed in hours. In a hospital where the wards are full and there is nothing left to give, someone has found a battered speaker and connected it to a long wire to catch the announcement. On a pier in Yokosuka, sailors squint at a sky that has not been theirs in a long time. In Manchuria and Korea and Taiwan, subjects of an empire that is dissolving, even as it breathes, wait beside sets that carry the same signal. On an airfield in Kyushu, a pilot who has not flown in weeks because there is no fuel leans over a receiver mounted on a post and tells his crew to quiet. Somewhere in a cave on a tiny island in the Pacific, a group of soldiers crouch around a radio they do not entirely trust. They think it might be a trick, and that thought makes them angrier than they have been in months. In an Allied headquarters far away, in rooms that smell of paper and cigarette smoke, staff officers plot the next moves on maps where cities are reduced to symbols. Messages from intercept stations are still arriving, confirmation of an imperial announcement at noon, a tone to the Japanese traffic that is less martial, more tentative. The Supreme Commander has a draft order ready that will carry a country across a line it has never crossed before. And still, back in the palace, the searchers stalk. They peer into rooms lit by candle and careful electric bulbs, push their way down stairways, look under tables as if the thing they fear might be hiding on its own. A thunderstorm soaks the manicured gardens, and makes the gravel a field of mirrors. A general, small and composed, arrives at the gate and orders a halt. His authority is not a weapon, but a kind of gravity, and it pulls the young men into his orbit, whether they like it or not. He speaks slowly and clearly, with a temper held in the palm of his hand, and what he says is as simple as rain. Obey. The searchers glance at each other in the downpour, and understand that the rope they have thrown over history has not found a purchase. The voice on the discs, the jewel voice, waits in its hiding place. When it is finally carried out of the palace by hands that tremble for reasons neither political nor poetics, simply because they understand the weight, it rides in the back of a black car through wet streets where men with rifles are still making decisions. It arrives at the broadcaster in time. Noon is seconds away. The engineer places the needle on the groove. There is a hush, then a hiss, then a sound the country has never known. Its sovereign speaking across wires, lowered into ordinary rooms, a ritual made into electricity. The words will not say surrender in the way people expect. They will say something else, in sentences that were written to be both formal and binding. They will speak of enduring the unendurable and suffering what is insufferable. They will accept conditions that the nation's highest councils have argued over until there was no oxygen left in the room. And yet, across a land that has walked into fire for years, people will hear the thing that matters. They will know that the war they have been told is eternal has, in a few minutes of fragile sound, ended. The road to that voice is long and choked with ash. In the first months of 1945, the sky over Japan becomes a ceiling of engines. The B-29 superfortresses come high and fast, then low and heavier, and the fire they bring does not care about the distinctions between arsenals and kitchens, between warehouses and nursery schools. In March, Tokyo burns for a night, and then for weeks, a firestorm that eats neighborhoods with a hunger beyond metaphor. Other cities follow. Osaka, Nagoya, Kobe. The rail lines keep moving. The ministries keep issuing orders. The police keep arresting rumors. People build water cisterns and glue paper panes, shoshi across frames they know will burn, and pretend that the thinness is not also their own. At sea, where the empire once extended in a clean sweep across charts, the blockade tightens like a belt. Home waters that had been busy with convoys now hold skeleton fleets. The Navy's proudest ships have gone down in distant seas, or sit idle, their crews staging ceremonial drills on empty decks. On land, across Asia and the Pacific, 1 million and more men wear faded uniforms and stand in the rubble of their own plans. They have fought Americans and British and Australians, Chinese and Indians and Filipinos, guerrillas and ghosts, and the return there has been is in names on shrine lists and stones in foreign soil. By April, on Okinawa, the last hard step before the home islands, the defenders are ground into caves, and the U.S. Navy learns the price of being close to Japan. The sea becomes a ledger of loss. Inside Tokyo's government district, within offices whose paper walls hold the secrets of an empire, but not the heat, the people responsible for the war's direction count and argue. The Supreme Council for the Direction of the War, known colloquially as the Big Six, is built to manage outcomes, but is caught between absolutes. Prime Minister Suzuki, a retired admiral who looks when tired like someone's grandfather. Foreign Minister Togo, whose face is all intelligence and overused courage. Navy Minister Yonai, pragmatist in a suit that no longer fits the body politic. War Minister Anami, who radiates an integrity that is also iron. And the chiefs of staff, Umezu for the army and Toyota for the navy. These are the men in a room that grips a country by the collar. 3 believe that the war must end before the end ends them. 3 believe that honor and strategy both attend a final battle on home soil. They have studied and sometimes quietly encouraged peace feelers through Moscow, a channel cut through protocol and cold distrust. They have read the Potsdam Declaration, The Allies' joint call for Japan's unconditional surrender, and they have parsed every clause. They have run their fingers over the sentence about the elimination for all time of authority and influence of those who led Japan to war, and they have paused at the line that says the nation as freedom of speech and religion will be established. They have fixed their attention on the one thing not named explicitly in those clauses, the status of the emperor, the kokutai, the national polity imagined as an unbroken line of sovereignty and identity. Could a nation's soul be preserved while its sword was laid down? Meanwhile, the war accelerates. On August 6th, a single plane drops a single bomb over Hiroshima, and in a white breath, hundreds of thousands of lives are altered forever. In offices and laboratories in the West, engineers and physicists have spent years compressing theory into metal. In the sky over a Japanese city, they become the new weather. A few days later, on August 9th, as news and rumor from Hiroshima seep across Japan's strained lines of communication, a second city, Nagasaki, is struck. That same day, the armies of the Soviet Union enter the war against Japan, surging into Manchuria with a speed that shocks even those who expected it. The Soviet move is strategic calculus. In Tokyo, it feels like a door slammed shut. Inside the palace and the cabinet, the language of argument shifts. War Minister Anami, weary and resolute, still believes that Ketsugo, the decisive battle on the beaches and in the fields of Kyushu, will deliver a result the politicians can name a negotiation. Others see only a ruinous arithmetic. There is no fuel, there is little food. There are rifles without ammunition in the hands of university students drilling with bamboo poles. Togo speaks plainly. To continue is to invite the collapse of everything the word kokutai is supposed to protect. The emperor, who has listened more than he has spoken throughout this war, makes a sound like a door opening. The Gozen Kagi, the Imperial Conference, is not a council of peers, but a ritual of decision. On the night of August 9th into the morning of August 10th, in the heat of a capital city that seems to hold fire even when it is not burning, the Big Six deadlock. 3 for acceptance of the Potsdam terms with one condition, that the imperial institution be preserved. 3 for one more battle, a fight that will burn Kyushu and main island cities, a fight whose casualties they describe with numbers their mouths can barely shape. The emperor, in his white uniform, and with the posture of a man who knows exactly how far tradition can bend without breaking, speaks. He speaks not like a deity, but like what he is human. Informed by reports of devastation, the censors cannot erase, aware of the hunger that already has a name in the eyes of children. He says in effect that the time has come to endure the unendurable. He bids his ministers accept the allied terms with a condition on kokutai, and he says this not as advice, but as a decision. Tokyo teeters on an unfamiliar edge. The sovereign has chosen to end the war. Messages flow outward through cables and couriers. Japan communicates to the Allies its acceptance of the Potsdam Declaration provided the emperor's position is maintained. Days pass. The Allies reply in the voice of the United States, Great Britain, China, and the Soviet Union. The authority of the emperor and the government shall be subject to the supreme commander for the Allied powers. The ultimate form of government will be established by the freely expressed will of the Japanese people. The phrasing is careful, like a bridge built under fire. In Tokyo, the cabinet reads and rereads those sentences. For some, they are enough to save a nation's face and its future. For others, they are confirmation of the nation's reduction to a subject of foreign will. Another Gozen Kaigi convenes, late on August 14th. The hour is late in every sense. The arguments are familiar and exhausted. War Minister Anami speaks with a gravity that feels like farewell. The emperor speaks again. Observers will later say he used the word misguided for the first time to describe the war's course, and that he spoke of a bomb whose cruelty had no precedent. He says that he cannot bear to see more of his subjects suffer. He breaks the deadlock again and orders acceptance of the Allied reply. He will speak to the nation himself. The message is prepared, written in a court script so formal it is almost a liturgy. The technicians from the broadcaster arrive with their fragile equipment, and the mechanics of surrender begin. The recording is done in a room that feels like a contradiction, part sanctuary, part bunker. The walls are thick. The equipment is delicate. The script, copied onto fine paper with characters so precise they look like engravings, is placed on a lectern. The Emperor steps forward. He reads the Imperial Rescript on the termination of the war, in a voice that is higher than most have imagined, steady and distant at once. He does not say the word that everyone expects. He does not say Hiboku defeat, or even Sumoru surrender. He speaks instead in the cadence of authority, turned toward survival. He acknowledges a new and most cruel bomb, and says that should hostilities continue, it would lead to the total extinction of human civilization. He declares that he has instructed his government to communicate acceptance of the joint declaration and urges his people to endure the unendurable and suffer what is insufferable. For those in the room, there is a sense of something crossing a boundary, a ritual unmoored from its usual privacy and set on a path toward every ear. Technicians check the discs under light. The recording is made twice, a safeguard against ruin. The lacquer warms under the heat of the lamps. The grooves carry the weight of the moment like a needle will later carry a voice. The discs are put into sleeves and marked. Around them, the palace breathes in an unfamiliar rhythm, messengers moving more quickly than court dictates suggest. Officers bending rules while the rules are in the process of being replaced. Someone suggests that the discs be kept nearby. Someone else, older and calmer, says they must be hidden. They are hidden. In the barracks and offices of the Imperial Guards, a different script is being read. Major Kenji Hatanaka, a staff officer at the War Ministry, has been living for weeks in a state of emergency that is almost a religion. He believes surrender is a sin against the nation and the Emperor both. That the cabinet, by bending to enemy demands, has betrayed the kokutai. That a proper ending to a war of such scale is a final defining battle on home ground. Around him, like iron filings lining up around a magnet, gather other young officers, some fervent, some uncertain, all shaped by years of being told that death is a duty if the empire requires it. They forge orders in the names of men who would never authorize what is to come. They speak to one another in words that turn fear into certainty and certainty into action. The Kyujo Incident, as it will be called later, begins with a quiet invasion of the palace itself. It is late on August 14th, the sky leaking its last light into a city that has had too much of both day and night. Guards at the gates receive orders stamped with authority and wave the conspirators through. Inside, the corridors that link state apartments to offices fill with men in uniforms that in the gloom look black. They cut telephone lines. They place guards in front of doors that have been open to the same flow of people for decades. They dispatch an armed party to NHK, the broadcaster, to secure the microphones and studios. The plan is to prevent the broadcast, and if necessary, to compel their superiors to reverse the decision. Hatanaka and his allies seek the consent, or the absence of resistance, of those whose commands can legitimate their actions. They go to Lieutenant General Takeshi Mori, commander of the 1st Imperial Guards Division, a man whose cooperation would make palace seizure a fact. Mori refuses. Hatanaka and a fellow conspirator draw pistols. Shots in the music room of a palace echo in ways that are unrecorded in any etiquette manual. Mori falls. It is a murder masked as necessity in minds that no longer distinguish between purposes and means. Outside, rain begins to fall, first as a murmur, then as if the sky is trying to wash the night away. While squads search rooms, opening drawers and closets, and peering under tatami, as if the discs might be hiding like animals, others roam the city to secure allies who are not home. Hatanaka rides a motorcycle in the downpour, his uniform soaked, his face a fixed argument against time. He seeks the commander of Tokyo's Eastern District Army, General Shizuki Tanaka, a man whose command can stop or bless what is underway. Tanaka is not at his desk. He is on his way, because the night has its own intelligence, and because the scent of mutiny carries on the humid air. Inside the palace, the discs wait. Palace staff, ladies-in-waiting and chamberlains, place them in a safe and then further conceal them behind codes of access that, for once, favor the ordinary over the official. They bundle them among office detritus, under floor mats, behind layers of bureaucracy. The rebels, worn to the business of orders and salutes, do not know how to see through the camouflage of paper and dust. In the halls, an officer with a drawn sword pauses before a door, as if the answer might be written on the wood. Near dawn, the rain lets up, leaving the gravel paths damp and shining. General Tanaka arrives at the palace gates and walks into a set of actions that are still not fixed. He is a career soldier with the posture of a man who has spent 40 years being correct. He gathers the conspirators in the East Garden. He speaks to them without flourish, and the words hit like stones thrown into shallow water. You embarrass yourselves, you betray your profession, you disobey a direct decision of the sovereign. He orders them to leave. Rank, when used like this, is a moral instrument. It cuts without raising its voice. The men begin to disperse. Hatanaka wanders the city that he wanted to save, and now cannot even command. He enters NHK and presses a pistol to a producer's chest. Then he lowers it. He writes a statement on scraps of paper that he scatters in a district where the police will later gather them. He shoots himself in the street, and someone covers him with a tarp. Dawn reaches into the rooms where the discs have been lying, cloaked and quiet. An aide retrieves them with hands that have steadied cups of tea and now lift the end of a war. A car waits in a courtyard. It drives across a city not yet awake, past soldiers who have not heard, past houses where people dream of things that no longer exist. At the broadcaster, the studio stands ready, a turntable, a microphone, a clock that has never been more important. The engineer checks the needle. He looks at the disc for scratches or cracks. He positions the arm. Noon is near. The nation that built a ritual around a human being who is only allowed to be a symbol is about to hear him as a man. At the stroke of noon, after a piece of imperial music that sounds like tradition poured into brass, a hiss fills the radios of an archipelago. The voice that follows is formal, high, and distant. For many listeners, it might as well be from the moon. The words are classical, borrowed from a Japan of emperors and courtiers. Modern tongues trip over them. Yet meaning travels around syntax like water around stone. We have ordered our government to communicate to the governments of the United States, Great Britain, China, and the Soviet Union that our empire accepts the provisions of their joint declaration. The war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage. We shall have to endure the unendurable and suffer what is insufferable. Let the nation continue as one family. The voice fades, returns, fades, returns. In rooms across the country, people kneel without being told. A mother in Tokyo, standing in a kitchen where the walls are stained with smoke from 100 blackout nights, holds her son by the shoulders and squeezes without realizing it. She has seen fire dragons in the sky and run with a wet cloth pressed to her mouth. She has boiled soup made of almost nothing and told her boy it was enough. When the voice stops, she sits down hard on the floor because her legs forget how to hold her. She is not sure whether to be ashamed or grateful. He puts his hand on her arm and says nothing either. On a factory floor in Nagano, where the machines have been silent since the last raid, workers in bandages and worn uniforms stand at attention because that is how they were told to do things like this. Some weep quietly. One laughs in a short bark that makes everyone else flinch. A foreman who once shouted himself hoarse goes and opens a window and lets in air without a siren attached to it. He tells everyone to go home. No one moves for a minute. Then they do. In a barracks in Hokkaido, soldiers exchange looks that range from relief to fury. One man, a recent arrival from Manchuria, goes to his footlocker and pulls out the letters he wrote and never sent. He reads them like prophecies. He has been told for years that death is preferable to surrender. Now he hears his sovereign say otherwise. The contradiction sticks in his throat. In a different corner, an older sergeant, who has seen more than the young men around him can imagine, bows low toward the radio and feels something unclench between his shoulders. On a pier in Taiwan, where the empire's reach had felt most ordinary schoolrooms and police boxes and post offices, the speech falls like a curtain. A clerk who just last week stamped certificates of loyalty to the emperor takes off his cap and sets it on his desk. Outside, the flags stir in a breeze that has no name. People ask, in Japanese and in Taiwanese and in Hokkien, what will happen now? The answers are variations on a theme. We do not know. In a prisoner of war camp in the Philippine hills, a man who weighs not much more than his blue shirt listens to a Japanese guard who is trying to explain through the barbed wire what the radio has said. Their language barrier is suddenly small. The guard's eyes are wet. He says the words for stop and finish and tomorrow. The prisoner looks across at him and thinks of nights when the two of them nearly killed each other because the night was dark and the world said they should. He holds out a cigarette through the wire. The guard takes it with a hand that shakes. In China, in a city where an occupation has lasted 8 terrible years, people gather in tea shops around radios that have only carried speech the occupiers approved. The owner, whose brother was taken away in 1938 and never seen again, flips the switch and leans in. The Japanese tongue, which has been an order delivered through a scowl, now speaks of stopping. The owner pours tea into cups that sweat on the table. They drink and say nothing for a long time. Then someone says, "They're leaving." It sounds like superstition said bluntly. In offices in Washington and London and Chongqing and Moscow, men fold their glasses and sit back in their chairs. The war in Europe has ended months ago with flags and photographs. This one stops with the broadcast of a man's voice that most of his own people have never heard. Messages skitter across cables. Stand by, hold fire, prepare to enter. In the Pacific, ships that have been pacing and pivoting and firing for years slow down. The immediate orders are both simple and enormous. Stop shooting. Begin feeding. Begin counting. A general in Manila looks at a list of Allied prisoners and draws a circle around the word, go. In modest rooms around Tokyo, doors close and sons kneel before family altars. In one, a general in his 50s, whose eyebrows make his fatigue look like anger, sits at a low table and writes with a brush. He has opposed surrender and yet followed orders. He writes not to the nation, but to his sovereign and his ancestors. He writes about responsibility. Then he takes off his sword and lays it on the floorboards and faces east and joins the dead. The next morning, people will read his note and argue for decades about exactly what he meant. The hours after the broadcast are not a clean slate. In Manchuria, Soviet tanks keep moving with a momentum that war has built, and peace does not immediately stop. In parts of China and Southeast Asia, where power vacuums open like pits, violence flares settling old scores in the brief light between occupations. On islands where Japanese garrisons have been isolated for months, the news arrives by leaflet or loudspeaker. Some units accept it, some fire at the messengers. Many simply wait for a face with both authority and food. In Tokyo, rumors sprint ahead of truth, as they always have. Someone says the Americans will arrive tomorrow. Someone else says next week. Women line up in front of shops that have nothing to sell for the comfort of a line of order that looks like peace. At the broadcaster, the engineers cue up the rescript again. They will play it multiple times, because the first time was not enough. People who could not believe once asked to hear it 3 times more. Teachers look at their students and realize that the curriculum has dissolved between the last class and the next. Police, who have spent years telling people to keep their heads down, keep their own heads down, and try to imagine how to direct traffic in a city where the direction has changed. In the palace, the man whose voice has just crossed a whole archipelago steps into a smaller room and sits. He is relieved of nothing. His choice has both ended and begun. The ministers around him are drawn down to bone, morally and physically. They will draft orders that pour in every direction: cease fire, safeguard property, maintain order, protect food supplies. They know that the Allied planes will soon be flying low over the capital, not to drop bombs, but to drop packages and pamphlets and paratroopers with radios. They know that a foreign general will take up residence nearby and treat their city like an office. And yet, even surrounded by maps and courtiers and soldiers, the moment is also simple in the way of things that have no choices left in them. A voice has said, "Stop." A nation that has been told since birth that voices like that cannot be contradicted is learning in an instant how to obey in order to survive. A broadcast can end a war, but it cannot make the damage vanish. In the weeks that follow, the relief of hearing the emperor's voice turns into work that does not end by sundown. Trains, their carriages still blacked out and their windows cracked, carry home men in uniforms that have been through too many monsoons. Ports fill with ships that look like floating dormitories, with Allied flags and medical teams and officers with clipboards. On roads that were once full of troop columns, carts now creak under sacks of rice, bundles of clothing, crates of hens, and old women with stronger backs than anyone expected. The supreme commander for the Allied powers arrives in Tokyo in a tailored uniform that looks odd amid the patched tunics and meticulous kimonos. He sets up headquarters in buildings built for a bureaucracy that has gone silent and begins issuing orders in English that are translated into Japanese with the fluency of necessity. Disarmament happens outside the newspapers and inside warehouses. Weapons are stacked in orderly, melancholy piles. Thousands of rifles become tonnage. Swords worn for years as signs of status, some of them centuries old, many of them recent blades, are turned in. The line at the police station, a river of steel. Young men hand over firearms they were told they were lucky to hold, and older men bring in family swords with eyes that do not admit tears but cannot stop them. Repatriation is a word that tastes of salt and diesel. Millions of Japanese soldiers and civilians, colonists, functionaries, wives and children, factory workers are carried back across seas from China, Korea, Taiwan, the islands of Micronesia. Passenger lists become maps of a vanishing empire. On the docks, officials try to register arrivals and assign them cots and rice and a permission to be home that feels like a question mark. In the interior, farmers plant longer rows and see in their minds the faces of cousins returning with nothing but a duffel. The country's population, starved by blockade and the collapse of trade, crowds into cities that can barely feed themselves in good times. Then comes the structural revolution. The Meiji Constitution, written in the 19th century, under the gaze of both German lawyers and samurai nostalgia, gives way to a new document drafted at speed by Allied staff officers and refined by Japanese officials who know how to fit foreign shapes to domestic frames. It renounces war as a sovereign right. It reduces the emperor from sovereign to symbol, the symbol of the state and of the unity of the people, a phrase that collapses myth into metaphor and requires a new kind of reverence. It gives women the vote. It makes men who had been told since birth to leave politics to their betters wonder what a ballot feels like. It makes the emperor into a man who visits towns in a suit and smiles shyly on train platforms. Children who had bowed toward the palace now wave at the imperial train. The transformation is not simply theatrical. It is constitutional, and it reaches into every schoolroom and tax office. There are trials. In a courtroom where silence feels like a learned language, men who wore power like armor sit behind glass and listen while charges unwrap their careers. Crimes against peace. War crimes. The words are heavy and sometimes new in Japanese. Witnesses speak. Documents are read. Lines in evidence link some decisions in Tokyo to graves in Nanjing and Manila and the hills outside Singapore. The emperor is not in the dock. His presence is both everywhere and nowhere, the question at the center of a strategy that wants to transform a nation without shattering it. Debates about responsibility begin now and continue, sometimes politely and sometimes not, in living rooms and classrooms and cabinets for decades. In neighborhoods that burned, gardens grow again in patterns that make sense to people who have no appetite left for slogans. Children who missed years of school learn to read in rooms where the chalkboards are still warped by heat. Teachers tear out pages of textbooks that called the war a holy act and replace them with exercises in arithmetic and grammar. Police, who were once agents of thought as much as of law, become simply constables, traffic directors, finders of lost children. The great shrines of state look inward. The festivals return to being celebrations instead of statements. The dual voice broadcast remains what it was, a pivot. To listen to it today, crackling through archival speakers, is to hear the human in the machinery of myth. The court language is opaque to most native speakers now. The words people remember are the ones that were already clear that they endure, suffer, accept. The record of what the emperor said and why he chose to say it is not a single book or a single argument. It is a lens through which the last year of the war in the Pacific is focused into something that can be carried in memory. It refracts the air raid sirens, the rice lotteries, the beaches where boys drilled with bamboo staves, the long trains of wounded. It also refracts the faces of those outside Japan who heard the broadcast as a lifting of weight. Filipino families, Chinese shopkeepers, Burmese monks, Indian soldiers taken prisoner in Malaya, American Marines who counted days with a pencil on the inside of a helmet. For them, the voice that ended it all was not a symbol becoming human, but danger becoming delay, then silence. We should be careful about what we ask this voice to carry. To say that a single speech ended the war is to tell a story that is both true and incomplete. It was the final act of a long sequence, the calamitous losses at sea and on land, the firestorms, the Soviet descent on Manchuria, the bombs whose heat still seems theoretical, the long argument in a small room where 6 men could not agree, and 1 man chose to end the stalemate. It was also the opening of another sequence: occupation, reform, reckoning, growth, selective memory, renewal. The emperor's voice did not dissolve responsibility, and it did not define the future unaided. It took the nation by the arm and turned it toward a different road. There is a quiet call in that moment that carries to now. Listen to the recording if you can. You will hear an ordinary miracle, a country collapsing one identity and reaching for another through sound. Visit the places that hold this history, the broadcaster's archives, where the lacquer discs sit in controlled air, the museums that keep the letters of the men who tried to stop the broadcast and those who made it happen, the rooms where constitutions were drafted and revised because objects keep us honest. Read the words of those who listened that day, in languages that map the edges of an old empire, and the words of those who could not hear but felt the shock waves in their own lives. And then sit with a question that is not about 1945 alone. What does it take for a leader, for a society, to step away from a story it has told itself for years and speak words that contradict it? What do we owe to truth when truth feels like loss? The emperor's speech that ended it all was not a flourish of rhetoric. It was a decision delivered in the only way that could have worked at that hour, as a command to stop and a plea to endure. We carry it forward not to praise a single man, or excuse a nation, or condemn a generation, but to remind ourselves that voices matter, that language can redirect history, and that the thin groove of a recording can hold a remarkable weight if we are willing to listen.